Hey y'all, what is going on? What is going on? It's your girl, Melba for Miami, Melba for Justice, also known as the resident legal diva, and it is time for another Mondays with Melba. So first off, before I get into our amazing guest today, I need to center Tyree Nichols. Um, I chose not to watch the video, and if you make that choice, that's okay too. You have to do what you need to do to preserve your mental health. I knew that seeing that video and seeing that poor young man be brutalized by officers over and over again was not going to do anything for my spirit and put me in a very dark place. My choice is that I'm going to watch the video before I do any legal commentary on the trial, which might be in 2 years or so. Not to say that it won't hurt then too, but at least right now, I'm going to protect my peace. And that is okay if that's the path you want to go. If you decide that you don't want to watch the video, just be mindful on some of the tips that are floating around out there, including turning off autoplay on all of your social media apps, because again, you might be scrolling and all of a sudden the video pops up and you didn't really want to see it and now you can't unsee it. Maybe post a message telling people, don't share the video with me. I don't want to see it. Just being very conscious and setting your boundaries. Because again, I mean, a lot of this, and, my guest and I are going to chat about this in a minute. It was kind of reminiscent to me. Actually, I think I responded to one of her LinkedIn posts about this. It was very reminiscent to me of the gatherings that we read from back in the day where white families would gather around to go watch a lynching and literally pack a picnic basket, bring the kids. It's a full day, activity, hanging out and watching somebody, be murdered. Right. So that's the kind of spirit I was feeling with this whole frenzied, every media outlet is like, oh my gosh, the video, it's coming. I'm like, do I really want to tune in to watch somebody lose their life? Discovery ID is one thing, but it's taking it to a new level. So anyway, just going to preface it with all that, leave y'all to just kind of some stuff to think about. But more importantly, I'm going to get into it with my amazing guest today, Elizabeth Leiba, who is an author. She's a DEI professional. She's a LinkedIn guru. I found her on LinkedIn. It was like, oh, yes, follow, friend, please. Can we be down because your stuff is dope? And so a beautiful cyber friendship has emerged as a result. So, Elizabeth, thank you so much for joining me on Mondays with Melba.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here. And I love that we have connected again because you're one of my day ones that I've been connected with on LinkedIn for quite some time. So thank you for extending that invitation, Melba.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Well, can you tell the audience a little bit about yourself, sort of your background, your kind of your professional history, and just, everything that got you to the point of writing this book?
Yeah, for sure. I am a 20-year veteran of higher education. So I actually was at University of Florida for journalism and decided to pursue a different direction. I went into K through 12 education. So I've taught 8th grade. And then after a couple different career turns and twists, I actually ended up in higher education. So I started in the admissions and then worked into a faculty role and now in a director role in the corporate office of my organization in instructional design and innovation as a director. So a lot of my journey as a professional has been as someone that has been a career educator, working at typically as a faculty member. I was worked at career colleges and community colleges. And I think a lot of that has been just because that's the group of students that I really felt like I had a really big impact with. I always worked with non-traditional students as a recruiter. So it just seemed natural for me to advocate for that type of student. It's probably the type of student that I most closely relate to as far as family and upbringing. A lot of the students in South Florida, first generation, a lot of them come from Caribbean or Latin background, maybe not speak English as a first language. So there's a lot of, I think, commonality with that. And as far as just my journey to now as working in more of an advocacy role and helping to use my voice on LinkedIn as someone that wants to educate about Black history and culture and Black empowerment and liberation. A lot of that just really came from looking at what was happening after George Floyd was murdered in 2020. And I was on LinkedIn. I just happened to be on LinkedIn because 2020 seemed like a good year for me to start networking and not really looking for a job actively. I was just more like, okay, I'm in my career, been pretty set in my career, but in transitioning from faculty to instructional design and curriculum design, it wasn't necessarily what I was trained in, even though I had been an online faculty member for so long. So I really wanted to just connect with other people in the field. And then George Floyd, we had already been sheltering in place. And a lot of people, I think for me as an educator, especially someone that's taught American literature and I've taught history, and I always love reading about the narrative of the American story and the Black experience in America. It was really strange to me that people were surprised by George Floyd's murder, as if this was like an anomaly. It was like, this is not America. And I kept thinking, well, actually, this is pretty much America. America, has had this history and this legacy. So I wanted to be more of an educator in that respect. Wasn't looking at LinkedIn as a place to become an influencer. It was more like I need to educate people about Black history and culture in general, because that was something that was really important to me growing up. I grew up in a very predominantly Black neighborhood, like I said. So those types of basic education I thought were fundamental to everybody's lives. And when I saw that most people weren't aware of just how tumultuous the Black experience in America has been since the end of slavery in 1865, Reconstruction, Civil Rights Movement, Black Lives Matter. There's been all these different various iterations of Black folk really speaking up and trying to liberate themselves. I mean, even during slavery, Black folk did not just accept slavery. And I think there's really a narrative that has been one where we've been framed in a way that's totally inaccurate and does not match the true history of the Black experience, and really going across the African diaspora about Black folk across the diaspora. And I really wanted to demystify and deconstruct a lot of those narratives. So that's what I started doing on LinkedIn. And I did that for about 2 years, and then started thinking, about how I could take the knowledge and a lot of the stories I was hearing from Black women. I interviewed you for my podcast, the Ebony podcast that I had. And the stories that we were sharing were very similar in that Black women had been able to be successful. We had been able to attain C-suite level. We had done all these great things. A lot of us had like a resume and roster full of things that we'd done education-wise and impact and great positions and recognition. But we all still had a lot of the similar stories of trying to overcome challenges, being the only one, not feeling necessarily that we were advancing as much as we should have. Even if we were accomplished, we felt like the road had been so littered with obstacles and challenges that it had been really difficult for us to even attain where we were. And I started to really think about what were some of the common things. A lot of the Black women, Black folk in general, but particularly Black women, were saying they hadn't had mentorship. They were dealing with microaggressions. They had people discriminate against them because of their hair, their name, the way that they spoke, that they were often going to the C-suite and they were challenged by people that did not look like them, that did not feel like they belonged there. And I just really wanted to create a narrative using the book with documented, credible experience from not only our lived experience, but also how could I validate that with research, with statistics, with case studies, with everything that really explained where all these things were coming from. Because it just seemed to me troubling that all Black women, we didn't know each other. We were in different parts of the country, yet we shared the same experiences. And that pattern was not that we were not competent, or that we were going into situations where we didn't have the secret passcode. It was really more because I think sometimes I think especially with the title of the book saying I'm Not Yelling, a Black woman's guide to navigating the workplace, I wanted to make sure that people understood this was not like, oh, this is the 3 steps to get a promotion. I really wasn't approaching it that way, because a lot of people told me they didn't even want a promotion. A lot of people, once they had a promotion, they wanted a demotion and they wanted to go back to the cube because they didn't even like it in the C-suite, because that's how I felt. I was talking to Lisa Hurley, who wrote the foreword for the book, and she was like, once you get in the C-suite, it's like the C-suite is dusty. You don't even really want to be in the C-suite. And I was like, amen, because I wasn't really feeling it. I was just like, man, I really don't even like the C-suite, So there needed to be not a guidebook for how to get in there, but really more how to survive and really how to unpack the feelings that you have when you're in there. Because a part of it for me had been, you aspire to something, and then when you get in there, it's just toxic, and you
Yeah.
feel frustrated, and you feel mediocrity all around you, and you feel like people are being, passive aggressive, and all of that against the backdrop of, this is what I've been working for my entire life, not even just through college, probably from the time that you were able to even comprehend it, what being Black in America meant. Your parents told you, work twice as hard, don't make people mad, do this, do that. There were all these different tips that everybody told you how to navigate. And then when you get to that spot, you're like, all of that aside, I don't like what is happening in this space. And how do we really make that connection between who we are and who we really are in our authentic selves and the spaces that we go into? And that was really what I delved into in the book, how we can unpack all of this unhealed trauma, which we experience really on an almost daily basis for most of us, and what we can do to really reconcile that, rather than these are the 3 tips to get you that corner office, which most of us, once we get it, we don't really want it anyway.
Yeah, so it's almost more like a survival guide, right? Like how
Yes,
to, find yourself, not lose yourself as you climb the corporate ladder or choose not to. You may decide
correct.
that, what, C-suite isn't for me. I can
Yes,
do more work or have more of an impact in the role that I'm in. But how do I do that effectively with all of these other external factors pressing in
exactly.
on me that have nothing to do with my qualifications?
Exactly. That's it in a nutshell. That is exactly it. It's this idea that for so long we've aspired to a lot of these spaces, but the spaces themselves are so full of landmines. So most of us, what we tend to do is we grin and bear it. We go into these spaces, we assimilate, we lose ourselves. And it's more than, I think for a lot of people, it's like, oh, with the pandemic, be your authentic self. But what they're talking about is very different from what we're talking about when we're talking about authenticity. What we're talking about is not that, oh, I'm in my PJs and I just want to be able to kind of be free and just say whatever's on my mind. That is only really scratching the surface of what it means to be a Black person in corporate America, or a Black person that works in spaces where everyone doesn't look like you. We tend to literally cover up our real self and almost adopt another personality that goes out in our stead. It's almost like this idea of double consciousness with W.E.B. Du Bois's philosophy from the Souls of Black Folk, where you really are split in two, and you have your real self, and then you have a forward facing self that you present to the rest of the world. You know that you're Black, your African culture and roots, but everyone's telling you you're not African. Who are you? Like, stop talking about that. You're not as, you weren't as, but you know that something isn't right. And you feel this push and pull, this really internal conflict and struggle, because everything about your existence is through the gaze of someone that doesn't look anything like you. And you're trying to cater yourself to someone that doesn't even understand that you're doing that. It's really, if you think about it, a very dysfunctional way for us to live, because we're literally walking around and we are just a shadow of who we really should be. So the same person
And
that we are at
it,
home, I wanted to talk about how to be that person in the workplace.
yeah, I mean, because, so much, I'm about like a quarter, almost like a third of the way through the book. And, some of the things that really jumped out at me were, you know, when you were talking about the high pitched Valley Girl voice in order to kind of like diffuse situations and like, I mean, that just like resonated with me because I think, was it that you had a special name for that?
Angela, that's my middle
Yes,
name.
yes,
Yeah, so Angela was
Angela.
like the name that was dubbed as this alternate personality, because I would be my normal self at home. And then if I had to interact with somebody for customer service, if I needed to get my phone bill adjusted, or, if you go on an interview, I mean, Dave Chappelle talked about it in one of his comedy stand-up specials. He said, all Black people, we're bilingual. We speak interview and we speak our regular voice, because we know when we're getting on the phone, it's like we have to totally switch up. And a lot of people don't even understand that phenomenon. Us,
Mhm.
living and working and growing up in South Florida, and working in South Florida, we know that a lot of people are bilingual. So a lot of people are like, oh, I code switch, I speak Spanish and I speak my regular, English. but it's not that. Because when you speak Spanish, you're speaking to somebody else that speaks Spanish, and it's understood that that's what you speak. And it's in an environment that you're not shunned for speaking that way. For us, it's almost like when we're code switching, that code switching isn't really seen as a power. We internally are like, that's a superpower. But I feel like a superpower shouldn't weaken you, right? A superpower shouldn't make you feel like you're doing something cringy or you're doing something that's not really who you are. And I always tell people, show up as you are. A lot of people are like, well, I didn't grow up in, that kind of neighborhood. The neighborhood I grew up in, the burbs, everyone talked that way, which is fine. So then it doesn't affect you. But for those of us that we have found ourselves suppressing who we really are, we don't want to be authentic. We don't want to step into who our true selves are. I think that has been a big part of this idea of shedding this Angela. Who is that? Who are you at your core? Who are you when you feel the most comfortable? Who are you when, you just are your most carefree and happy? And there's no reason why that person shouldn't exist in a professional workspace if you're being professional. And I think there's a weaponization also of professionalism, where professionalism has been, there's this almost like this narrative of professionalism, and we don't fit that. Because if you have an afro, if you have locks, or you're wearing bamboo earrings, it's like, that's not professional. But a pearl is professional that came from, I don't know, a shell. Like, how is that? When a bamboo earring is made of gold, you have on a pearl, but my bamboo earring, because of the narrative you created around that, says that this is not professional. Who says so? Whoever creates the rule says so. I worked in addiction treatment, and most of the managers were in sobriety, because a lot of times in addiction treatment, those same people that have gone through addiction, they want to give back and they want to work in the field, help other people. I happen to not be one of those people, but there was no stigma against people that had been addicted to drugs, because most of the people in the facility and people that worked in that field had been. But you see people that have fully tatted arms. You see people that have gauged ears. You see people that have their noses pierced, people with blue hair. And that's a part of just culturally, a lot of the people that have been in addiction are kind of like a little bit like on that edge of not non-traditional, what you would see in a corporate America. And no one bats an eyelid, because that's who owns a facility. That's who is the leaders in the organization. And no one says, oh, that's not professional. So I started to really think about, well, what does professionalism mean, and how is it excluded Black bodies? Because just the natural way that we show up in any environment, the way we go to church would be with our locks or our afro and our nice gold hoops and a flamboyant, maybe bright dress, but that would not be seen as professional. But that's what I would wear to church. So it's not inappropriate. It just doesn't, it's not through the gaze of a white person, the majority culture, it's not seen as that. So I think that was a part of looking at how do we code switch, but not even just code switching. How do we just carry ourselves? How are we navigating the world, and how are we suppressing that? And that really blurs over into the workplace as well. And also what the workplace demands of us, which is to be something that's totally opposite of what we really are.
Yeah, just, kind of piggybacking on that point, as, both of us rock natural hair, I'm thinking about all of the women, right, who use perms or relaxers in order to comply with the corporate culture and what's perceived to be, most professional, yet it's killing you. Right? Because now a new study came out, and now there's all these lawsuits swirling around, relaxers causing cancer, and the people that develop these products had some inkling that these, chemicals are cancerous or problematic on some level, yet kept, pushing it and perpetuating the stereotypes in order for corporate gain. That's reality, right? Like, you want that money, it's a problem, but you're like, oh, let's get a couple million more before the bottom falls out of this, right? So this is like a life and death type situation at its very core. Like, being able to be your authentic self at work is the difference between you living a long time in a healthy manner or not. And it's really dire when you think about it from that perspective.
It's scary. A lot of the stats say that Black women in particular, because a lot of times we do tend to do things, to the extreme. It's almost like that strong Black woman, that trope It works against us because we work harder. We're constantly questioning ourselves. We're very perfectionists, a lot of us. We're very high achievers. We're the most educated in our demographic. We are most likely to head home by ourselves with children. But a lot of that is from policy and practice and law as well, because of a lot of the things that have happened in terms of, I mean, it goes all the way back historically to segregation, Jim Crow, and just Black families basically being destroyed by the end of slavery. And I think there's really a mass like denial across, the country from those in the majority that don't really seem to understand that Black people were slaves. They were enslaved Africans who, upon being freed, were systemically and systematically targeted. I mean, if you think about it, if you own something, it's just like a selfish person. If you're in a relationship with someone and you don't want them to break up with you, a lot of times that person will try to hurt you or sabotage you. And this is literally what happened. But at the end of slavery and Reconstruction, there was a slight increase in Black folk being let in, and then a slamming of the door. And that was 100 and some odd years of segregation, separate but equal. And I think a lot of people, I mean, you being a lawyer, you know about all this, but I think a lot of people don't even know about Plessy versus Ferguson. They don't know that you have someone having to go to the Supreme Court and say, I'm human, I deserve equal status and equal accommodation, and then being like, well, it could be equal, but it can't be near me.
Right, exactly. Like, you can have this over there, very far away.
Over there, far away, because I used to own you and I don't want you anywhere near me because you're an animal. This is not happening hundreds of millions of years ago. This was 1896. So the idea that people could understand what happened in 1776, where patriots were rallying to throw tea, but they can't understand 100 years later or 100 plus years later that Black folk had to go to the Supreme Court and say, can I be considered like a human being amongst you? And they're like, well, what we'll do is we'll let you have accommodations, but your accommodations need to be totally on the other side of town. And that's where segregation just basically caused another probably 300-400 years of just disparity, because you have underfunded schools, you have people not being able to get jobs, you have people not even able to qualify for welfare because you can't be married and have a man in the house. So when we think about the angry Black woman trope and the strong Black woman trope, a lot of that was created in a sense because they destroyed our families, and then we were raising children by ourselves, and we had to educate ourselves. And you have Black men that have been emasculated because they can't work, they can't be in the union, they go to war and can't get GI Bill, they go to war and fight for the country and then can't even drink at the same water fountain or can't get a job in the same place. Where I saw this video and someone was saying, I was in Vietnam and I fought, and then the same people that were in, or even in Germany, the same people that were German prisoners of war were able to be served in a restaurant. So it's just the whole unfairness of it. And a lot of the burden when Black men have been targeted, especially with the school to prison pipeline and with the disparity in targeting, racial profiling and targeting, Black women really have been at the forefront of kind of picking up the pieces. And I think a lot of times Black women and Black men get pit against each other too. And we know it's not Black men's fault. It's just the way that the system has been designed, where we're basically having to do everything. And that does have mental health complications. It does leave us feeling stressed, overwhelmed, heart disease, all the fibroids, anything, maternal health outcomes, infant mortality rate, depression, anxiety, early death, heart failure, anything that you could think of is caused by stress. And food deserts cause us to not have proper diet. So then we're more likely to have all these other ailments such as diabetes, which also leads to early death. So when you think about everything systemically, redlining, not being able to get a mortgage, not getting paid equally, all that stress that leads to women in particular just feeling overwhelmed. And for a lot of us, we're just living day to day, like just trying to hang on and then not having the conversation. I think it wasn't really until COVID that people even felt the permission to be able to say, yeah, I'm struggling, because everybody else was saying it. So we finally said it too, but we really didn't admit why we were struggling. It wasn't just because of COVID. We were more affected because of, obviously, as a Black and brown individual, COVID affected our communities more. But it really wasn't just COVID. It was everything else. George Floyd compounded and brought it to the surface. But we've been dealing with racial profiling. We've been dealing with inequity. We've been dealing with knowing that we're not getting paid fairly, knowing that we don't have the appropriate resources, knowing that our schools are underfunded, knowing that everything, that all the stats, we live them, but we haven't been able to properly really communicate why Black folk are struggling. And we're dealing with a majority culture that seems to believe that hard work is the key, but they didn't work hard because we built this country. So that's really ironic as well.
That part. So I want to pivot to one more aspect before we wrap up our time together. You made a really poignant point when you talked about your experiences at UF, and that you had your lone African American teacher was basically an African American literature studies class, and that really shaped a lot of your perspectives on life. Now, I wanted to go back to that and just talk about that a little more, especially in light of the fact that UF now has a new president that falls more on the conservative spectrum. We know that the Florida governor has banned AP African American Studies because he claimed it had no educational value. That's a whole other show. But with that being said, can you communicate a bit more why that experience was so important to you and how that really impacted your path forward?
Yeah, I think it goes back to what I always say about Maya Angelou. It's like you can't know where you're going unless you know where you came from. So in order to go forward, you really have to have a good foundation in who you are. So if you have a child that goes into an adoptive family and they're not given any information about who their parent is, a lot of times what you find is that child may feel a sense of longing, like, who am I? Where do I come from? What is my origin? And I think people can see that when it comes to an individual person, that happens, right? That trauma is very, very real, and something that somebody would have to deal with in order for them to feel loved and nurtured. But I think it gets lost when we think about a whole diaspora of people that have no connection to where they're really from. Even those of us that are from the Caribbean, if you have Caribbean roots, there it ends, because you don't know where your family came from before that 2, 3, 4 generations, however long they have been on the island where you originated from. So you still don't know your actual origin, because your origin is not that island. All of us in that Black folk that are in the Western Hemisphere that were dropped off throughout the Caribbean, in Brazil, South America, Brazil, in the Americas, none of us are from here per se, unless, we might have some indigenous something that really ties us to this land. But other than that, we have a side that is in Africa that is completely lost to us. So I felt as though, for me growing up, it was really important for me to understand the African American experience, because this is where I was. And I really wanted to understand my African roots. And that was something I really delved into, even as young as in high school. I was always reading. I was always really very curious about what the origin of Africa and African Americans really was. And me being someone that was raised here, what my origin was, because I was going to be here and I would have children here and I would not go back to the Caribbean or anywhere else. So I had to start where I was. So I think that really framed my idea of what a sense of space looks like and who you are. It has to be grounded in yourself. I think a lot of times we're looking for validation from the outside without looking internally. And I think for me, my Black roots, my culture, and who I really was at the core of myself was really what I wanted to dive into. And that was why it was such an important part of my upbringing coming up. And then even going to UF, it became even more clear because of the fact that I didn't have a lot of Black professors. Unlike growing up in Fort Lauderdale, where all my professors, all my teachers were Black, majority of them. Going to UF, like, majority of them were not, and I only had like one. Like you said, there was only really one Black professor I even had an intimate conversation with or anything. And I think that really showed me as well that the world was a lot different from what I thought. Growing up in South Florida, I did not know just how different the world was outside of that three counties, right? You're in a tri-county area. It's Dade, Broward, and Palm Beach County, and you think everywhere in the world looks like this. And it was really culture shock to go to North Florida and just see that, upperclassmen had to pull you to the side and say, you're going to get called the N-word. You guys ride through town and they're in pickup trucks. So when it does happen to you, just, be prepared for it. Like those kind of tough talks. I had never had that really in South Florida. I mean, we knew to just be careful when the police pulled you over and things like that. But I wasn't used to the idea of not only could I be targeted by the police, I could be just targeted by a random person that just doesn't like the color of my skin. And that was something I had not been used to. So I think as a Black person, knowing and understanding your strength and your power in your real origin story, who you are at your core. And Black folk across the diaspora, for us, that has always been in our ancestry, in our lineage. That's why we had oral literature. We passed down stories from generation to generation. And us understanding the strength and power in those stories. I just remember in high school reading Sheikh Ante Diop's African Origin of Civilization and being like, in a state of shock, like Black people were kings and queens and invented this and did that and built this and had that. I couldn't believe it because I thought the origin of civilization was Europe, because that's what I had always been taught, right? And I came from UK. So you're hearing, I mean, when you're growing up, as if like, Africa is like some jungle or something. Like no one teaches you the truth. You see Roots. That's what I saw on TV. And it's like, oh, they did them a favor. At least they came here and they were able to get civilized. And it was literally, that's kind of like the idea that you get in your head, as though, well, we're here now, so we got to make the best of it. And it really couldn't be further from the truth. And I think that that's really important for us to understand our own legacy and making sure that we are properly grounded in what the real history of our greatness is. Because you have a majority that is really talking about how great they are, but we never talk about how great we are, because it seems as though, that's not acceptable. And for me, I feel like that's a part of the problem, that we're not allowed to celebrate our greatness. And for us, that comes around one time a year with Black History Month, and then we go back to supposedly assimilating to the majority culture, because our culture is not supposed to be on the front of everybody's minds, but then everybody's copying our culture and making money off of it. So it's just
billions.
Yeah. I think a lot of the hypocrisy is what bothers me, and I feel like it's important for us to be well grounded in that, so that we can understand what's going on. I think if you understand the rules of the game, then you're not confused. But if you're like, what's going on, I feel like that's constant state of anxiety. And I think for me, I have a sense of peace and calm, because I know Khan, and growing up in the hood, I think that's probably a part of why, we're not really, when we go, I think we're less intimidated by being in our Black neighborhoods than we are in predominantly white neighborhoods, because it's like people can't really con us. We know what's going on. We know how to keep our head on a swivel. And I think we need to do the same thing in those other environments as well. We have to really recognize game. And a lot of the games that are being played are telling us that we're less than, telling us we're not worthy, telling us that we don't come from greatness. And the truth is that we come from all of that and more than probably we can even imagine. And if we didn't, they wouldn't have raided it and took everything from it. So it had to come from somewhere. So that's really why I think that legacy is so important. We have to know the truth, because if you know the truth, and people can't weaponize anything against you. It's like if someone's talking mess about you and they're just telling a bunch of lies, it's like, I wouldn't even address that person, because it's just like, I already know the truth, so I'm not even going to go confront that person. That person wastes their breath. And I think what's been happening with us is we actually are, what are they saying about me? Oh, really? I'm like that? Oh, and then we take it and we're like, oh man, that's messed up. If anyone did that in real life, we would be like, forget that person, or we would just ignore them, or we would just be like, laugh at them, like, okay, so what, who cares? And we would go on about our business. But we have someone that's literally created a narrative that is totally the opposite and totally untrue of what we really are. And we've almost, I think I honestly don't even get more upset about the person that's lying. I get more upset if the person is sitting there believing them. Like if we think about a girlfriend coming to tell us, oh, this somebody did something, I would be like, girl, if you don't wipe your tears, and if they're lying on you, like, well, let them waste their breath. I mean, you know what I mean? So it's like, we have to really not be invested in structures that were not built for us. These structures and these areas, these spaces were not built for us. So how do we steel ourselves against that? And how do we strengthen our core, so that, like you said before, if we want to go into those areas, we know it's not us. And if someone's doing something, a lot of times I treat people like I do in the classroom. when students are trying to disrupt me, and you know this, Mel, when students are trying to disrupt me, I just stand there and let them go ahead and let everybody
Mhm.
stare at them because I'm just like, are you done? Like, seriously, it's like you're
Are
not
y'all
gonna
finished? Are y'all done? Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I just literally stand there because it's just like, now that you got that off your chest, can I get back to important things that need to get done?
Right.
Like I don't have time to really debate you, so I'll just sit there and let you listen. And then you're going to be embarrassed because everyone's staring and looking at you. But I don't even care now because you didn't care about interrupting me or being annoying. So I feel like
Mhm.
it's being really like what I do with the classroom. It's a matter of us knowing that someone being disruptive or someone saying something, we don't owe them explanation. We don't really even owe them education. I think I really only try to educate people because I just feel like a moral obligation as a teacher. But I think for most of it, it's really just us knowing whether we choose to share that information or not. And I think that's what I learned growing up. It's like, you know, your power and your greatness. My teachers used to tell me that all the time. You know, when I was in high school, even, you know, you're a king, so, or and a queen, so act like that. You know, that's what they would
Mhm.
tell us. Literally, I had a class, actually an African American studies class when I was in 11th grade, and he gave us all African names. He was like, when you walk in this door, this is your name. Pick your name out of that
Oh, I
book,
love
and
that.
this is what I'm gonna call you. Forget that European name. It was like that was how they were trying to indoctrinate us. But when you go out into a predominantly white world, you start using the Valley Girl voice. You know, some of
Mhm.
us have used nicknames or other names to not make our name too ethnic. All these different practices and things we're doing to blend in with a society that is not going to accept us anyway, because as soon as they see your skin, they're already going to know that you're not whatever you've, you know, made yourself out to be. Because no matter how much of a Valley Girl voice I put on, I'm still not going to be that person that is assimilated into that idea of what they think I should be. And we never can. So it's almost like being in an abusive relationship where the person tells you, well, it's your fault. And if you did this, this, and this, I wouldn't be like this. I wouldn't be
Mm.
angry. And we both know that that is not true. If someone is abusive, they will continue. It doesn't matter how much you tell them it hurts, or how much you explain it to them, or how much you reading information you give them that it's bad for the kids to see this, this, and that. If that was the case, we wouldn't have men killing women. You know, we wouldn't have kids getting taken away, because typically if someone is abusive, that person, you shouldn't have to show them 100 million times. And I think what we're seeing now is we've had reconstruction, we've had the civil rights movement, we've had Black Lives Matter movement, we've had George Floyd 2 years ago. Now we have another incident where probably at least a dozen police officers stood around while 5 of them beat someone to death, and
Mhm.
they did nothing. So that shows you that it's systems that are corrupt, and it doesn't matter who you put in there. A cog in the wheel is only going to do what is expected, which is what we've said this from, we've
Day
been saying it
one.
2 years ago. We've been saying this from day one. It is not, oh, this person doesn't like you, because that sounds like a elementary school. We know that it's not that the person individually doesn't like us, but if they're operating in a system where everything they've heard is that we're not as good as them, because like a man is not necessarily doesn't like women. He's not hate women, but that doesn't mean he won't sexually harass. Doesn't mean he
Right.
hates women. Like, it's like
Exactly.
they can understand when it comes to other stuff, but it's like, well, I don't hate you. The man that tried to touch my butt in the lunchroom doesn't hate me either, but he still did it, and he still needs to be fired. It's like,
That
we
part.
know. We're not dumb. We know that. But at the end of the day, still, we need protection because people don't act in our best interest. And I don't understand how someone can understand sexual harassment or understand gender inequity, but when it comes to racial inequity, they're confused. They need like 10 reading lists to just get to the idea of, can you just treat people with respect properly? Because we're treating you with respect. We don't have a problem with you. You're the one that has a problem with us. And then we have to explain to you why you have a problem with us. And then you're like, I don't, because I don't see color. It sounds so nonsensical that you have to laugh. Because I'm like, wait a second, this doesn't make any sense.
It's
I
like
have
the
to
ultimate
explain to you
gaslight.
why you're hurting me.
Yes, it's like the ultimate gaslight. You're like, don't do this to me. This is why it's bad. And it's like, but it's not bad. And I'm going to keep doing this
Exactly.
to you. And you're like,
Right.
oh, no, it is bad. It's hurting me. And it's like, but no,
And
it's
then
really
they're
not.
like, and then they start crying because they're like, you're making me feel bad because you're saying that I'm making you feel bad. And actually, I think you're the one that is bad because you're making me feel bad. What?
What?
Yeah.
But
I
like
just
literally, that's the
Yeah.
place we're in. That's the place we're
Yes.
in. And, I really want to highlight Agatha's point, and shout out to Agatha OFIU. We need to protect and endow programs like the FIU African and African Diaspora Studies, because again, it's that history that not all of us are taught in high school or in undergrad. So you go to grad school and you learn certain things. And also, it's about having accurate history. I mean, the reality is you can't make decisions about the future until you know your past. And if we're not all singing from the same hymn book in terms of what happened in our country, what the history is, and how to move forward, we're never going to make it, right? Like, you think about, and I always give this parallel in terms of Germany. After World War II, they removed the words for race from their language. They have criminalized supporting Nazism or extremism, and like heavily criminalized it. They teach about the Holocaust from baby. Like, you come out the womb and they're like, yo, there's a thing called a Holocaust. We messed up big time.
Right.
Can never let that happen again. Oh, and by the way, here is like 10 museums that you have to go to as part of the school tour to understand the horrors of the Nazi regime and of the Holocaust. But the problem is, in the US, we never had that. Like, Reconstruction would have really been that time. Like, okay, we've abolished slavery. Man, that was really messed up. We got to make sure never to do that again and never enslave another people again, and make sure we give reparations for what we did. But we never had that reckoning. I mean, you think about in South Africa after apartheid, they had a time of reconciliation led by, Archbishop Desmond Tutu and, I think it was P.W. Botha, or whoever the prime minister of South Africa was at that time, a white man and a black leader of the church got together and did basically a reconciliation tour. Can't say that 100% made things better, but it was a step in the right direction. Right. To bring that discussion and that healing and that recognizing, like, yeah, something really bad happened in our country. And the thing that bothers me in seeing the banning of AP studies and everything being lumped under the critical race theory umbrella is that it's taking away from accurate teaching of history, which would then inform Black and white and all students about the history of this country. So that way you're not just like knee-jerk reaction. You're just calling me racist just because. No. There's more to it than that, So anyway, I've waxed poetic enough. I need Elizabeth, tell everybody how to find you on social media, and most importantly, where to get the book. I'm Not Yelling, how to navigate the workplace for Black women.
Oh, thank you so much. And I appreciate this. This has been really fun. And I always love talking to you. Anyone can connect with me on social media. So I'm on Instagram, I'm on Facebook. I mostly am hanging out on LinkedIn. So that LinkedIn is the primary way to connect with me there, follow my work, connect with me on my website, lizleiba.com. The book is available on Amazon. It's also available in pretty much all of the major booksellers. So it's at Target, it's at Walmart, it's at Barnes and Noble. And it can be ordered online directly from my publisher, which is Mango Publishing. So anywhere you can pretty much pick it up. It's also Kindle version and the audio book is coming out at the end of March.
Woo, exciting. So for folks listening on the podcast, I'm going to have the links in the description of the episode. For everyone else watching on every other medium, I will be providing a link in the chat and as well as in the comments for you to be able to click and order. It is on my Kindle, so it's on my phone. I'll be like, the problem is I need a plane trip so I could be like, have 3 hours and read the whole thing like straight through, but I'm getting there.
You're getting there. You're going to get there. And I thank you for getting it because this has been a really amazing conversation. I always love your energy. So I got to come back and talk to you some more.
Yes, please. Yes, please. Because we have plenty to discuss.
Oh, I know.
So thank you so much for joining me on Mondays with Melba. To everyone out there, thank you so much for tuning in. We'll be back next week. We're kicking off Black History Month. Elizabeth is showing us the way in, so definitely buy her book. Next week, we're going to have an amazing immigration attorney who's going to talk about some of the changes that have come about in the immigration space. But seeing that it's Black History Month, everyone for the next 4 Mondays will be a Black-owned business. So don't say you don't know where to go. Like, I got you. I got you. All right, y'all. Take good care and see you soon. Bye.